And just like that, emergency podcast, kind of debut podcast, more than anything. The Dodgers beat is back. This is the inaugural episode of the Bleed Los podcast. It's your boys, Alonso and Juan, with the voice in the sky, Roger. Juan, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. Every day I wake up and the Dodgers are World Series champions. I haven't been able to say that in 32 years. So I feel like it means more to me now that I'm older as opposed to the last time that the Dodgers won that I was a kid. But I'm feeling good and I'm ready for baseball to start, man.
It's a trip because today, this day, or the reason that it's an emergency podcast is the Los Angeles Dodgers have signed one Trevor Bauer to a 3-year deal. I'm calling it a 2-year deal because there's no way that he plays that 30 year under that deal. But the 3-year, $102 million contract to play in Los Angeles. We had talked offline a bunch about where Bauer would land. I had said he was going to be a Met. Roger had said he was going to be a Met. I already know that he's going to change that story. So whatever, I just want to get it on the record. I know that you also had thought that he wasn't going to be a Dodger either. But now that he
Yeah.
is a Dodger, we have 3 Cy Young winners in that rotation at the moment. Legit depth, by the way, too. Like not just depth, like just names, but legit depth. And that's before we even get to the Dustin Mays and the Tony Gonsolins of the world. You have Julio Urias in that rotation as a starter. But with all that said, it's a lot of money. The Dodgers went over the threshold. There's been a lot of talk this offseason about the threshold. The Dodgers also have not done any movement there at third base yet. I'm kind of curious to hear your take on as we sit back and kind of absorb it. How do you feel about that acquisition?
I know, look, in fairness, we've already talked about this, so you and I, but my feelings haven't changed. I'm still like, I'm still iffy on the guy. After I actually looked at his numbers, the guy has really only pitched he only has 2 good seasons. So, yeah, I understand that it's a complete overpay. That being said, if he ends up pitching like he pitched last year, then hell yeah. I mean, look, the other thing, in fairness, it's really hard for me to root for that guy, considering I know so much about him behind the scenes, his comments, his political comments. And it's just, we're living in a different world now where it's really hard for me to ignore someone's personal beliefs when they're on the mound. Like if I know somebody, I'm not saying this about Trevor Bauer, but I'm just saying this in general. If I know a guy's a wife beater, it's hard for me to root for a guy who's a wife beater. That being said, I'll root for the team. And if his success is good for the team, then that's great. In terms of me being excited about this signing, I got to tell you, I'm not. And, I was having this conversation earlier with a friend of mine who was like, for that amount of money that you guys are paying him, he's got to be your number one, right? And here's my thing. I don't think he's our number one. I think Walker Buehler is a better pitcher than he is. And, Kershaw's done it longer. Kershaw will probably, either be 1 or 2. So we're paying over $40 million for a guy to be our number 3. But that being said, that's a good problem to have if that guy is our 3rd best pitcher.
And it's something that I'd mentioned to someone a little while ago. You guys know about this. I guess I'll say it on here. A source had texted me this morning that he was 100% sure that Bauer was going to be a Dodger just because the way that everything had lined up because of Luba. And that's coming from another source, another agent, I guess I can say that. And I agree with that. I think they're an embarrassment of riches is a thing with the Dodgers, right? And the way that everything kind of happened to this point also is for some old school folks. I'm kind of old school. It might rub them the wrong way too, because I was joking with Roger this morning as I was at pickup for my son that I think that Bauer is trolling everyone, and psych, he was trolling everyone, and now he's a Dodger. But it's interesting to see though, because you have 3 former Cy Young guys, right? You have Walker Buehler. I agree that I don't think Trevor's going to be your number 1 guy. I agree that he won't be your number 2 guy. It's possible he may not even be your number 3 starter. And that's insane that you're going to pay $85 million essentially for a four of your fourth guy. But again, that's a good problem to have because from there it's like, so who's the fifth guy? Naturally, it seems like it's Urias, and then from there, if you really wanted to have a sixth starter, you could have Dustin May, you could have Tony Gonsolin, assuming that Tony Gonsolin is not in the bullpen. I personally think that Tony's going to end up in the bullpen anyway. But be that as it may, they have legitimate depth. And the insane thing about this is everyone was talking about the show pods. In our group text, we talked about the show pods in one, the show pods in two after all these acquisitions. And don't get me wrong, the Padres are exponentially better than they were 1 year ago, and they were already good. You add Darvish in a trade. You didn't even have to, fork up a bunch of money, but you acquire him via trade. They have Clevenger, they have Lamet. They have a legit rotation, right? Granted, Clev isn't going to pitch this year, but that's still a deep team. And then they go out and they make the veteran moves, kind of like how the Dodgers did a couple of years ago to get the Chase Utleys of the world. They got Austin Nolan. So they're making moves that are the right moves, right? However, Finessman, Andrew Friedman, the GOAT, everyone has to bow down to him, bodies the entire NL West with one transaction, with not just with one. And then he puts everyone else on notice, like, hey, we're trying to repeat. So that's the other, component to this is even if Trevor Bauer is, we'll say 2019 Trevor Bauer, which is still a pretty good Trevor Bauer, mixed in with like David Price, the way that he's throwing right now, he looks great. You have Kershaw, who easily came off one of the better seasons he's had in the last 3 years, went for the most part injury free. And then Walker Buehler's coming into his form. And then you have the legit depth of Urias and Dustin May, who are still young kids, but they're legit major league pitchers. I'll take it. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan in the world of Trevor Bauer. I respect, his stuff. I respect, his role, etc. But I'll take it. I mean, I'll gladly take it. If it's going to position us that much closer to a repeat, I'll gladly take it. Roger, I'm curious to hear your take on it because, again, we had all agreed and come into, agreement that he was not going to be a Dodger, and you were asking for a point earlier in our group text. So I give you the floor.
I'm going through the messages right now, trying to find that text where I said Bauer was going to be a Dodger.
Hashtag fake news.
But yeah, I mean, I did start feeling he was probably going to the Mets. Yesterday, as we were talking about it, kind of felt like he was going to take the money, maybe longer years, something. It was going to take him down to New York. But as I thought about it, I thought, and I mentioned this to you guys, I mean, if there was a reason he'd come to LA, it'd probably be wants to be at home, win a championship with his home team, and maybe the analytics factor. Dodgers are heavy into analytics, the pitching, how they mix everything in. That could have been one of the things that tipped the scales in in the Dodgers way. So, I'm glad to have him. I know he rubs people the wrong way. I know he's kind of that, he's a brand. He's trying to become a brand, and it's going to be all what he does on the field. That's what's going to be the most important thing. But I mean, I think he's an interesting cat, and it's going to be interesting to have him in LA and see what he does. If he puts up numbers like last year, I think Dodgers are on their way to a repeat.
He's consistent. I will say that about him. He's consistent, even though everyone has a year, right? Everyone has a year where they're garbage, but he's consistent at what he's at. I agree with some of the folks that are like, oh, well, his WAR is 6 and Marcelo Zuna's at 5 and Charlie Morton's at 3.5. I get that. But at the same time, Trevor Bauer is a Cy Young winning pitcher. So you don't just win a Cy Young by fluke. That's not how it works. So it's one of those things where I think, the Dodgers, I don't think the Dodgers are a super team yet. I know a lot of people are saying that on the intraweb. But setting aside all the political BS and all that jazz with Trevor, and also, the additive of the brand, the dude's consistent. And as long as he doesn't come out and just kind of, because obviously everyone knows who runs that clubhouse. Obviously you have your JTs of the world, but that's a question mark. But, people are going to look to Mookie Betts, Clayton Kershaw, excuse me, AJ Pollock, your vets. Everyone, Jock Peterson in his goodbye letter today talks about his vet. Everyone has their vet that they came up with, and everyone knows who runs the show in their clubhouse. So I'm not necessarily worried about the clubhouse dynamic per se, because if there's one thing we also know about Andrew Friedman, that office does their due diligence on character. They made it very clear when it came to Mookie, when they were willing to invest that level of money into Mookie, that they did their due diligence and then some. So I'm not worried about that part. The only thing that I'm worried about is a comfort level, if you will. Because some teams, once they have like the names on the roster, they get comfortable. Granted, you still have to go out and play the game, and we haven't even played a game yet, and here we are. So, it's gonna be a fun season. Because and the crazy thing is it sounds like the Dodgers are still not done. So that's kind of the preposterous thing, and kind of going into that, I'm kind of curious to hear Juan's take on what the rotation might look like going into next year, because you and I just threw out two different scenarios. Reality is there's more than two that they could really go with if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I think you're going to see Kershaw opening day, then you're going to go Buehler, then you're going to go Bauer, then Price, and then Julio. The thing about this is, and you might be able to bump up Bauer. I mean, the fact that now you have depth, you might be able to go ahead and give guys an extra day. You might be able to skip them in the rotation. I mean, the one thing about Walker Buehler that kind of is baffling to me is that, in spring training is not his thing. He uses the regular season as his spring training. So the last couple of years, we've seen that Walker Buehler doesn't start off as we see him in the playoffs. He's a different pitcher in the beginning. We had those conversations. What's wrong with Walker Buehler? What's wrong with Walker Buehler? So, if Trevor Bauer can pick up the slack and pitch well straight out of the gate, I think that'll help. I am curious to see if they do keep these guys, or, I mean, you're already hearing rumblings that David Price may be traded. Now, that's going to be really interesting because I can't wait to hear Roger come in on this, because if David Price ends up getting traded, then I think maybe Roger might be right in the sense, I don't think this guy ever wanted to pitch in LA. I get it that he skipped last season for health reasons. But I do think with Roger, I found it a little odd that publicly, I still don't think he's publicly congratulated the team on winning the World Series. Am I right, Roger?
I never saw nothing. I could have missed it, but I never saw any of his tweets like directly after it saying anything about them winning.
I mean, we'll get into this later on in the show, but I could see then trading David Price and to get a need if something doesn't happen. But I do think one of the things they are going to need to consider is, if Julio is going to be our number 5 and Gonsolin and May are going into the bullpen, is that the best? Is that the best we can do in terms of, is Dustin May going to be able to develop a third pitching out of the bullpen? Do we send Dustin May down to the minors during the season because we have this pitching depth so he can develop a third pitch? Is Dustin May going to be a trade chip? I mean, it's good problems to have. Again, we talked about that. I mentioned this before. This does feel like it's the end of a chapter. It does seem that old Dodger team, that old group that was together for 8 years and they won the championship, that chapter has ended. And now we're retooling. We're going into a new phase of Dodger baseball. I was surprised by the signing. I think it is a huge overpay, but I think this is, Andrew Friedman tried doing this with Bryce Harper. I think he likes overpaying for a short amount of time. In 2 years, that money comes off the books. I think in 2 years, you only have Mookie Betts on the books. So they're going to have some more, financial, flexibility in a couple of years. And it's scary because, like Alonso just said, Andrew Friedman stayed quiet. We didn't hear anything. That's one thing that I love about this front office. There weren't any leaks. So then they just come out there and boom, just knock you out there. And I would love to bring on Padre Fan and talk to them and see how they feel. maybe they might have to take down their off-season banner that they have hanging. But yeah, I'm really curious to see if they choose to hang on to that depth, because again, Kershaw is a question mark. You never know when that back is going to act up. You don't know what you're going to get from David Price. So maybe having this much pitching depth is something that we need to hold on to.
I don't think they're going to move on from David Price. I think not only would it be difficult to move that deal because he's 35, but I think that they're okay with the depth because you're coming into a season with a healthy David Price. Everything that we've seen with David, from the time he was traded to now, he started throwing from, the mound, doing all that stuff after the wrist problem. It's looked great. And I said, obviously we weren't doing this before. I'll say it on the record. I said it before. I said it to a bunch of people. To me, the steal of that trade was going to be David Price. Granted, no one expected a pandemic. No one expected any of that stuff. So it could have been 2 really solid years of David Price. If we can get 1 solid year out of David Price, it gives the opportunity for Gonsolin and for Dustin May to work on what they need to work on. I personally think that Gonsolin's going to end up coming out of the bullpen, period, just because he needs to work on. He has stuff to work on. Not to say that it's a bad thing, but it's that on the job training that that you got to sort through, right? Dustin May for sure needs to develop another pitch, but even at that, the stuff that he has is beyond electric. So I don't think they're necessarily worried about that. They're just taking it slow. It's kind of like how they were with Julio, the kid gloves, yeah. And so having this depth of 3 Cy Young winners in your rotation, and then a Walker Buehler, you go Julio Diaz. What more do you want? And even at that, the insane part of that is it's super possible that David Price in this current rotation could be the 5th guy. Urias could be the 5th guy. They could move, they have moving pieces where if a Clayton Kershaw has to, skip a start, they can spot start Dustin May. They could spot start Tony Gonsolin. They have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to that. And from what I have heard, they're not done. They apparently are wanting another relief arm. That's not a bad thing to seek out as well. In a perfect world, I would like them to go after Josh Hader. If they went after Josh Hader, they have the prospects to make that deal happen. And now the Brewers aren't asking for a bananas return. They're still asking for an overwhelming return, but not a bananas return. So if you could package something, with a top tier prospect and some other arms, that are in the system, do it. Because obviously they're in win now mode again. They're showing everyone we're trying to repeat. So why not go after arguably the best left-handed reliever in the game to just tell everyone, yo, we are not here to play games. The only games we're going to play are the ones that we're going to win, and we're just going to smoke you from top to bottom. Because the other thing we have to remember, they still technically have to replace Pete Baez because Tommy Kaline is out for the year, right? So there's still a hole there that they have to make work, and the pitching is just going to be preposterous out of this world. And it's crazy because the Dodgers have been able to essentially fix some log jams, but now they have a log jam at least for a year at pitching in the starting roles, and that's a good problem to have. You can't complain about that.
Hey, let me ask you this: when talking about replacing Petey, do you think Santana is going to be a candidate? Because obviously, I think now Santana's road to the starting rotation is blocked. So I think now the only way you're going to have Santana is to use him in the bullpen. Could he become a bullpen weapon?
I think he could. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy that's mentally like I'm a starter and only a starter. There's always guys that are like, hey, I've always been good enough to be a starter, but I'm comfortable coming out of the pen. And then there's guys that are like, nope, I'm only a starter, and I'm only a reliever. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. Dennis doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. Dennis actually strikes me as the kind of candidate that they could use for spot starts if a Kershaw gets hurt. To be honest, he also still has some work to do. He's got electric stuff, but he just has to work on control. And he's still young enough where they can still work on that stuff. He's only 24. Similar to Dustin May, they have things that they can work on to be able to refine the stuff, right? To get it to where it's electric and all that jazz, kind of like how they have with Dustin. And sometimes it's even subtle stuff, like with Dustin. Literally, they moved him from one like half side of the rubber to the other, and it just changed his delivery completely. So sometimes it's just subtle stuff like that. And Dennis strikes me as the kind of guy that doesn't have an issue with that. If they did have an issue with that, then obviously they wouldn't be swirling around his name in any way. The name I'm interested about that sort of scenario is Josiah Gray. Josiah Gray, he's the upper echelon prospect, if you will, that the Dodgers have. That everyone's just been like, yo, like we need to keep an eye on this guy. We need to keep an eye on this guy. And I mean, he's got great stuff. And
where's he at right now?
He was in, if I'm not mistaken, actually the levels didn't really count last year because of the pandemic, but he was, I believe, him and Jeter Downs were also a part of that 2018 deal. Let's not forget where they got him from. He's not homegrown, but
Right.
But he was in, I believe, in high A, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, that's going to be quite a jump to go from high A to the big show, especially with a lot of these minor league guys. They lost a year last year, so it's, and I mean, I think that's another reason maybe not to make any trades and really hold on to that depth, because you just don't know without these guys getting regular, consistent work in the minor league, how are they going to be this year?
Well, like, so Josiah Gray has always kind of been looked at as he's going to be for sure like a middle of the rotation guy at worst. And that's not a bad thing to say about a guy. His changeup is the pitch that they need to work on. Kind of like how Dustin May has the two pitches, right? Josiah Gray needs to work on a couple of his pitches and make some adjustments to those pitches, but he's coachable. So that's why I don't foresee it being an issue, because if you can make it to the show and you continue to take that feedback, from the Mark Pryors and then other guys in that bullpen or in that starting rotation, it's going to help, and it's going to make it easier, to be able to develop your stuff. So the point is if there's two guys that are blocked, quote unquote, it'd be those two guys. But at the same time, it's only temporary, because David Price is only here for another year, technically, right? Or 2 years. And assuming they don't move on from him, which I don't think they will, then at that point, it's like, okay, if let's say Kershaw retires, let's just say he's like, hey, I'm done. The back can't take it anymore. I've made my money. I got my ring, got all the things. I'm just going to retire. Cool. So from there, Dustin May or Tony Gonsolin, assuming they don't get traded, assuming that they, are healthy, that's who goes into that rotation, right? So even in that, all you're doing is you're essentially just removing one piece and adding another stellar piece to it. And then from there, it's like, okay, we have Josiah Gray and we have Dennis Santana down in the minors. Let's bring them to the pen. Let's develop their stuff.
I mean, can we just talk about Tony Gonsolin? I hear people, always talk about Tony Gonsolin, and I get it. He's still a young guy, but right. You saw what he did in the World Series. Now, this could be, this might be just a little harsh, but what am I missing with Gonsolin? I feel like he is deceptive. It always surprises me when I see how hard he throws. He, to me, I don't know. I see him and I see Tim Leary. I see a guy who can pitch a few good games, but then, like in the World Series, he can get hit hard. He just, I don't know. I hear everyone talk about Gonsolin, and I get it. I mean, every time, aside from the World Series, every time they've thrown him in a game, he's delivered. I feel like Dustin May has a higher upside than Tony Gonsolin, but tell me, what am I missing about Tony Gonsolin?
So I heard it best from a scout a few years ago. He's got the stuff of a right-handed Clayton Kershaw, but he's just slower to the plate. And there's nothing wrong with being slower to the plate. The only issue is that he's considered an older prospect. So if he were 22, 23 years old, he'd probably he'd probably be more people wouldn't shit on him, I guess is the best way to put it. Now at this point, people look at him like, hey, this dude's supposed to be kind of turning the corner, if you will. And I mean, the thing that I like about Tony from like a mechanical standpoint, he uses a super simple delivery that's super clean, super repeatable, and he's also an athletic guy. He's a low key athletic guy, kind of like Kershaw. Um, and his arm slot's consistent, all that stuff's there. So I mean, he has all those mechanics, right? It's just a part of it is, and we talked about it in those post game shows, is the psyche, because the double edged sword of him coming up so late is he doesn't have the wear and tear and a lot of innings under his belt either. So when you get thrown into those situations, the World Series, the NLCS, you're just like, oh, and you're just kind of expected to just, step up for the moment. And granted, the Dodgers for the last, in this 8-year run, they've had a cast of guys that like, Jock Peterson got benched, right? And he's this rookie that got benched and then steps up and has huge postseason hits. Kike Hernandez was essentially, kind of chopped liver in Houston, shows up here, struggles for a little bit, and then he turns out to be a super sub. And now he's he has the potential to be an everyday player. So the Dodgers have a knack for finding those guys, right? Gonsolin, I think he has the potential to do that. He just has to overcome some of the inconsistent command control issues that we saw, that, obviously that we saw when he did those spot starts. But he's done a good job of throwing strikes. And that's what you want to see as you transition in the big leagues, is you want to continuously throw strikes. So he's there. It's just the thing is, we've also been privy to an embarrassment of riches of pitchers, that they've set the bar so high that it's one of those things that you kind of look past those intangibles rather, that Tony has. The dude's good. The only issue is he's been a log jam of pitchers, and he's considered an older prospect. And sometimes that's not good, but sometimes that's not bad either. Because as we've seen, the Rich Hills of the world, those sorts of guys, they have longevity in the game. What I'm curious to see, though, is how, if they, assuming they use him from the bullpen, how he reacts to being used as a bullpen arm. Because I feel like, from the things that I've heard about him from when he came into pro ball and stuff like that, he made starts. That's where he was at. He was at starts, and he didn't come in relief really until recently. So I'm kind of curious, but I mean, all along, everyone has kind of said that his role would be like a number 3 starter, but a lot of people also look at him like an elite level relief pitcher. So there's the potential there. And if there's any staff that can make that work, I feel like it's the Dodger staff.
What do you think, Roger?
I found that old text message where I called Bauer 1 year, 40 million. So I'll send that out to you guys later. But
here's where I'm going to dock you. Where I'm going to dock you is it's not a 1 year, $40 million deal. So no deal.
I got the first year.
No point.
Well, I mean, as I was telling Alonso earlier, I think I'm kind of curious to see Price in that rotation. However he lines up, number 3, number 4. So I'd be interested to see that. You see how he comes back this year, and see what they can do. I mean, that rotation right there, I mean, lines up against anybody, and it's probably going to be better than anybody. I mean, you're hearing it now, watching, MLB Network earlier. Now they kind of switched their tune. Now they're saying, Dodgers are the best rotation in baseball again. They were debating it earlier with, the Braves and the Padres. Now it's coming back to the Dodgers. So I'm kind of interested to see however they line that up. If you got Julio at 5, or I mean, you could just mix it up on matchups. It doesn't have to be a traditional 1 through 5, kind of however these series are coming up. You could have, Walker at 1 and Kershaw at 4, however you want to do it. I think the Dodgers are in a good spot. And, some of these other guys like Gonsolin, I think Gonsolin's probably going to play that Ross Stripling role, kind of where they need a spot starter, might be him, and then back into the bullpen. So that's probably what we're going to see out of Gonsolin this year.
Here's
that's a really that's a good comp, the Ross Stripling and Gonsolin, because I guess I have just bad memories from the 2017 World Series with Stripling giving up those bombs. But whenever Stripling was in the game, I never was like, oh well, here we go. It's a shutdown inning. He's an overpowering pitcher. But the majority of the time, Stripling was pretty successful. And I didn't give that guy the credit he deserved. He went out there and he did the job. And I do feel like Gonsolin, for the majority of the time, gets the results. It's just seeing him, struggle to get through 2 innings in a World Series game, and hearing people talk about him. And I get it. The Dodgers were put in a tough situation there because of that pitching rotation situation. But now going into the playoffs, having this pitching rotation, I mean, yeah, you got to feel real good if you're a Dodger fan today.
Well, and the crazy thing about the Padres, just to kind of, for comps, their rotation is going to be Yu Darvish, Blake Snell, Danielson Lamet, Joe Musgrove, and Paddock this year, because obviously Clev is hurt. That's a pretty good rotation. That's a solid rotation, especially those 3. And I've been the advocate for this. We talked about it in the postgame show. If you're going to win a World Series, if you're going to win a playoff series, you have to have 3 really good starters. And the Padres X'd all those things, because Yu Darvish has come back into his own now that the Astros garbage can gate, all that jazz came out. So now he's coming back into his own. Blake Snell is legit. We saw that in the World Series. And thank you, Tampa Bay, for pulling him when you did, because that dude is legit. And Lamet's legit too. And now that dude has, that to bounce off of as well. And then you counter that with the Dodgers, where, this can go any which way. But I mean, Clayton Kershaw, Walker Buehler, Trevor Bauer, Julio Diaz, David Price, Dustin May. That's preposterous. And then from there, no one career-wise, at least, we'll say in the last year, has an ERA over 4. I mean, if that's what happens, like, no one's going to be angry about that, right? And then, I mean, and even like some of the projections that I've seen, they're projecting, Walker with 14 wins, Clayton with 12, Trevor with 13, and those other 3, ODS, David, and Dustin, at 9 wins. Like, why? Okay.
Wait. And that's for a full 100. Wait. So have they decided, are we playing 154 this year or 162?
It's supposed to be 162. I feel like the verdict is still out, but that's like on an average of like those guys going 200 innings.
So those projections are based on a 162 game season?
Yeah.
That seems really low.
And even at that, though, you have to remember is that these starters of the Dodgers tend to get pulled a little early, earlier than some. And not that that's a bad thing. You're just trying to save the guy, right? Because the one thing that's going to be interesting to see this year, they played a 60-game season last year. They're going into 162. Full spring training, just going right into it. There's going to be some guys that I feel like are going to be a little rusty. So that's going to be interesting to see. I don't think just the Dodgers that people were saying might have a slow start, or the Padres, or all these other teams. I think everyone's going to have a weird slow start, in part because you're going from 60 to 162. And let's just say, and hopefully I hope it doesn't happen, but let's say there's stuff that happens like last year where like the Cardinals, where they missed, 12 games or something like that in a row because of a COVID outbreak. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's just going to throw a bunch of stuff in the loop too. So, it's things like that where it's going to throw stuff off, and it's going to be interesting to see how they're able to overcome that. But that's also assuming, hey, this dude doesn't get hurt. This dude doesn't, you know what I mean? So it's that sort of stuff that, I'll take it. But for comp's sake, the Padres are basically the same. 13 wins for you. Lamet's 13, Blake's 11, Joe Musgrove's 11. So, I mean, I feel like this year is obviously we talked about this yesterday. If you're coming in as the champion, you have a giant target on your back. So everyone's already going to make that more difficult, right? But everyone right now is just trying to get better than the Dodgers, because, I mean, they literally just went out and threw a Brinks truck at Trevor Bauer, and they didn't give a damn. I mean, they're way over the threshold now. And if they sign JT, they're over the threshold even more. So, at this point, the Dodgers are for sure. And like, we're going to try to win this again, and we don't care what it's going to cost. And I know ownership has made it clear that they would be willing to go over that threshold for the right guy. At this point in this current market, I don't see how Trevor Bauer is not the right guy. who are you going to give that money to, Jake Odorizzi or Trevor Bauer? I'd give it to Trevor Bauer. So, and obviously the Dodgers could they have maybe traded for a Yu Darvish again or a Blake Snell? Maybe, but also, maybe that they wanted to get a little younger, and not that Blake Snell's any older anyway. But I mean, out of the two, I'll take the push and take Trevor Bauer because he's the Cy Young winner.
Yeah, I mean, you brought him up. I think we should just get into it because all I heard all day today was after the Bauer signing from the Dodgers. Okay, now announce JT. Can we get into this JT situation? Like, what's happening? Because I'm like Roger now in the sense is what is taking so long?
So everything that I've heard is he wants a 4-year deal. That's been made publicly known. I've heard that he also the first offer from the Dodgers was 2 years with a third option. I feel like that's a fair offer if that is in fact what happened, especially because he's 30. He's 36. And I get that he probably wants to retire at 40. Can respect that 1,000%. I really can. But at the same time, the thing that's interesting to see is the Dodgers. I mean, at this point, the third baseman that they have is Edwin Rios. If you're going to stick with Taylor at the 2-bag and then Muncy at first. So that means, by proxy, Edwin is your third baseman. Not a bad option, of course, but he doesn't have the same, intangibles, if you will, as Justin Turner. I am surprised that he's not signed with anyone, but that also kind of shows you that maybe he realizes that his market is not going to give him 4 years. I am of the party, though, that if he hasn't signed by now, I don't think he's going to sign, if I'm honest with you, with the Dodgers at least. And that's unfortunate, because of everything that he means to the Dodgers, that he means to that organization, the clubhouse, the whole bit. But, going 4 years for a guy like that, where we don't even officially don't know if there's going to be DH in the next year or two, that's a risk. Granted, we all know that they did it with Chase Utley, but that was for other reasons. He was meant to be a clubhouse guy, but Justin's going into this expecting to be an everyday player. So,
Alonso?
Yo.
So Bob just tweeted a little bit off the record. I mean, off the subject here. Bob tweeted, since Ozuna signed with the Braves, that there will be a DH, maybe not this year, but next year. So Bob said that it's going to happen, so we could expect it not to happen in 2022 then.
I was about to say, please tell me you are not referencing Bob Nightingale, because I don't know. He's employed by USA Today. Is that right?
MLB Network.
He's employed by MLB Network. Okay. Now, mind you, not avoiding, let's just completely forget the fiasco that was yesterday when he tweeted that, Bauer to the Mets. I still go back to the guy voted for LaTroy Hawkins for the Hall of Fame, and he works for the MLB Network. I digress. Let's go back to more important conversation, Justin Turner.
Well, and I will say, I do think that there will be a DH in the NL. I just don't think it'll be this year. Just because of how everything went down last year with between the players and the union. And one thing I want to clarify real quick, so I don't get murdered. Blake Snell is a Cy Young winner. What I meant by Trevor Bauer is the Cy Young winner. He's of the most recent. Blake won it in 2018. So no disrespect to you, Blake, by any stretch. But that's just to clarify that. But I think JT, the thing that I find interesting about JT's market too, it's like the Blue Jays have kicked the tires on him. The Twins have kicked the tires on him. I think that ship has now sailed with them acquiring Nelly and the Dodgers. And there's been this rumor of this other team out there. I truthfully, with working the phone or whatever, I haven't really heard anyone else aside from those teams. So I don't know. And it might have even been Bob Nightingale that said that shit too. But I ultimately, the only move that makes sense for me for him is to stay a Dodger at this point, because if he wants to win again, that's what it sounds like. I don't know why you would go anywhere else at this point, unless it is just to try to make the bag. And if that's the case, I'm not going to be mad about that. Hey, you gotta take care of yourself. You gotta take care of your family. No one's going to be pissed. But what I do think the Dodgers should do if they don't sign JT, and we've talked about this, go acquire Chris Bryant. Like, make that deal work. They're shedding salary. They're just giving people away. They basically gave you Darvish away. So why not go and try to get Chris Bryant to fill that hole? Because Edwin Rios is a nice player. He's a great bench player, has all, the fittings of like the Kikes and the Jocks of the world. But what are you going to do after this year? Like you're going to have to make a move there regardless, right? So I'm annoyed by it, but at the same time, the thing that I'm most surprised by is that he expects a 4-year market, and I just don't see it.
Well, everybody I talk to says the exact same thing that you just said. 2 years with a 3rd-year option. Okay. So if everyone quickly goes to that for Justin Turner, I want to know, what is Justin Turner's agent telling him? What are they telling him? You can get these 4 years somewhere. I mean, do you want to go ahead and leave? I mean, I go back to the story that AJ Pollock's wife told him before the start of next year. I mean, of last year, in terms of, he had his child was premature, and he was contemplating opting out of the season because of COVID, right? And then his wife told him, is like, but if you opt out and they end up winning the World Series, you're going to hate yourself. You're going to be, that you missed out on that. So you mean to tell me, if you're Justin Turner, and I get it, you have other things you have planned. You have to plan your future. He has his foundation. He's very involved in the community. I get that. You're still going to make money here. Would you rather go chase that bag? And like you said already, Alonso, he's gotten to the 10-year mark. He's going to get his, what's it called? He's going to get his pension. In the end, how much money do you really need? I get it. Look, I don't blame him for chasing the bag, but later on, are you going to regret it if the Dodgers end up winning the World Series this year and being like, I could have had another ring, but I went ahead? And especially when you get older, you start you look at money differently. I'm really curious to hear what his agents are telling him, and then what the Dodgers front office is doing. The Dodgers front office do they have even more leverage now that they have Bauer and saying, look, this is where we're going. You're either with us or we're moving on. And the Chris Bryant thing, I think Chris Bryant is a good risk versus reward, ratio there, because if the guy, it is going to be only a 1-year deal with Bryant if you trade for him, right? And if the guy balls out, I don't see the Dodgers re-signing him. That's fine. But if Chris Bryant will help you win a World Series, I'll take that.
Well, and even to that, it's like, you want to talk about a super team. Why not have an MVP winner, added on to the infield that's already stacked, right?
Well, right. Didn't they say that there's no team going into this season that's going to be able to field 3 former MVPs and 3 former Cy Young awards, and you're going to add Chris Bryant to that?
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing about Bryant. He had an off year. I think last year was just one of those off years, just because everyone was just thrown for a loop, and you can't fault a lot of guys. Shit happens, right? But I also think a lot of those guys need a change of scenery. Kind of like how we saw with Jock. Jock knew that he needed a change if he wanted to be an everyday guy. Kike needed the change if he wanted to be an everyday guy. Obviously, Chris is already an everyday guy, but I think he just needs that change of scenery, going from Chicago there, because they're obviously in a little bit of a rebuild, if you will, because they're just shedding salary. So the reason I feel like it's a good move there is it's a, like you said, low risk, high reward as far as it goes, and you fill a hole, you plug a hole, especially if you don't bring JT back. The other caveat, though, is let's say they bring JT back, and he's been a little injury prone in the last few years, right? The hamstring, the wrist. And the wrist isn't his fault. He got hit by a ball. It happens. But let's say that continues to linger, and you give that dude a 4-year deal. 4 years, we'll say $15 million. Edwin Rios is really your only other option there. What do you do? So it kind of cripples you, right? So that's why I feel like I don't know what his agents are telling him. His agency, for the most part, is pretty reputable and all that jazz, as far as like being realistic with their clients, right? In this instance, I don't get what they're saying. I don't know if it's a like, hey, what if, look what I've done for you kind of deal. In his mind, I don't know. And that's not even to shit on Justin, because he's a great human. He's a great ball player, and everyone and anyone knows that he's a solid person. So I don't even think that it's necessarily that. I just think it could just be one of those like, hey, this is what I want. If I'm not going to get it, then cool. That's it. So, and who knows? I honestly don't know how this plays out, but I know the person that's going to be the hurt most by it is Roger. So, Roger, what do you think happens?
I mean, up to yesterday, I'm pretty certain they bring him back. Today's signing kind of, I mean, I don't know if it throws a wrench into those plans. I mean, money wise, I mean, they've reached that threshold. Obviously, if they don't make any moves, they're going to continue to go over. They're going to put another 10, 15 million on top of that for JT. Um, I mean, I don't know. I want him to come back. We discussed this before. To me, he's just not another player. He's a fabric of this team. He's a leader. I've seen how this team plays differently when he's gone on the DL and then when he's come back. A couple years ago, they was it 2018, that slow start they had when he was on the DL, then he came back and then they took off. So, he's more than just, their third baseman. And he's basically their captain, and he's been their captain for the last couple of years. And, to see them without JT, opening day getting the rings without him, that'd be a kind of a tough pill to swallow. But, now it's, like you said, it's like, where are they at? Is he so, set on getting 4 years, or is it a money issue? So there's something there that obviously we don't know what's going on, but it's like, I mean, I think it's going to get to that point where Dodgers are going to say, hey, this is what we've done. This is what we plan to do. You're going to go with us, or, we're going to have to move on.
I just find it interesting that it's dragged out this long. I actually thought all along, regardless of the moves that the Dodgers were going to do, even if they signed a Trevor Bauer or if they went after a DJ LeMahieu or anyone like that, that this would have been wrapped up right after the season was over.
Yeah, I thought it would have been the first move. I thought season over, week or two, maybe 3 weeks tops, he's back. That's how certain I had it that he'd be back. But it's just dragged on, and I think that's what's making people nervous. It's like, why is this taking so long? It's like every day, why is this taking so long? He should have been back in the fold in November.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting is all the third basemen, that were out there as free agents, if you will. The marquee one was George Springer, signs that 6-year deal with Toronto. They're all gone. There's no, or I'm sorry, he's a center fielder. I apologize. Position players is what I meant. Jesus.
What about Jackie Bradley Jr.?
Well, and I was going to bring him up in a minute because the Dodgers at some point are going to need some depth in the outfield because AJ Pollock's, my man's, he's not getting any younger. I was kind of curious to hear your guys' take on who, a hot take, if you will, of these free agents. But one thing real quick with JT, the other thing that doesn't make sense with JT is how quiet he's been as far as that end of it goes. Like, aside from, the story that leaked out through the Times about the 4 years, you haven't, everything that I've heard has come from other agents. I've not heard anything, and a couple other front office sources. I have not heard anything from JT's camp. And I'm actually surprised by that because you would think if he's trying to get something moving that, they would, hey, this is kind of like the Trevor Bauer thing. Let's either debunk this or not debunk this. And I'm kind of surprised by that just because of how long this has taken, because we're 2 weeks away from when pitchers and catchers report. So it's going to be interesting. I personally still don't think he's going to resign at this point. If it's taken this long, I don't think he resigns with the Dodgers. What do you think, Juan?
I think he resigns. I think he resigns, but he's not going to get what he wants. I think in the end, seeing that they went in and they signed Trevor Bauer and they're poised to go to the World Series again, I just don't think you can pass that up. I mean, so many major leaguers, great major leaguers, never even made it to the World Series. So to pass up an opportunity to not only win one, but win two, I get it. Money, you need it. And it's easy for me to say how much money he needs, not knowing his situation. I mean, the guy does do a lot for the community. I know he probably spends a lot of his own money doing that kind of stuff. I can't fault him if he does leave and someone does give him a better deal.
Right.
But if he leaves to another team and it's the same amount of money or it's the same amount of years that the Dodgers, then that's going to just be a real head scratcher. That's just going to be, I think, something maybe Roger was right. Maybe something did happen between them and that we won't know. But yeah, I do think he's just eventually, I think he's drawn this out as long as he can. It's the inevitable. They're perfect for each other. Just go ahead and do it. Hey, look, he tried. He tried to get him to give them more money, and it didn't happen for him. So now just take what they're giving him and go get that ring.
One and one just a random parody example to show you as far as even a perfect fit. Brett Gardner is not signed with the Yankees. I'm going to be honest. Brett Gardner is one of those similar to JT that it would be weird to see him in a different uniform. And apparently they had made, certain concessions to try to make that deal happen. Hasn't happened. Yadier Molina with the Cardinals. Granted, apparently that's supposed to happen now that he's coming back from the Caribbean series, but still, as of now, hasn't penned a deal with the Cardinals. So I mean, it's one of those things where in some instances it's like hey, no hard feelings. It's business, and that's just kind of where we're at. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that pans out in the next little bit. Interestingly enough, though, there is the Jackie Bradleys of the world. D. Gordon is a free agent. Jason Kipnis is a free agent. Nick Markakis is a free agent. Ryan Braun is a free agent. And those guys also haven't signed with anyone. Addison Russell, I'm not expecting him to sign with anyone after what had happened, but he's a free agent. Eric Sogard, free agent. So, I mean, there's still quite a bit of names out there. Granted, some of those are a little older, but Jackie Bradley Jr. is still a legit center fielder. I don't know what sort of money he's commanding, but this offseason in general has just been weird because Trevor Bauer just signed today. We're 2 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. So, I mean, it's been a super weird, just kind of overall thing. But as we wrap this up, I wanted to, from all three of us, I'll start with you, Juan. I want to hear a hot take for you for this Dodgers team going into camp, as far as like what you think is just something that's going to be out of the blue that kind of comes out of nowhere potentially, or something that's just right under our noses that we should expect as far as this team goes.
God, that's a really good question. I think you're going to see the offense struggle at the beginning of the season. I think the pitching is going to carry them, and I think you're going to see a lot of people freak out in the beginning, just because I'm worried about Cody's shoulder. I'm worried about, can Corey Seager stay healthy for a full season. The one person I'm not worried about is Mookie Betts. But I'm concerned about, which AJ Pollock we're going to see. How are we going to replace, what are we going to do with second base? Is it going to be Gavin Lux's job to win or lose? Is Chris Taylor going to take it over? And then what version of Chris Taylor are we going to get? I mean, he had a nice little bounce back season last year, but I am concerned more. The pitching, I'm not worried about. I'm just more concerned about the everyday players.
What about you, Roger?
I think we're going to see some of these guys on the bench step up this year and step up pretty big. I think you're going to see Zach McKinstry have a pretty big role on this team. He's going to step up and fill some of the void, for maybe Kike and Jock. And I think Rios is going to have another big year too. I mean, we saw what he can do. Pretty much every at bat was a home run. You give him some more playing time and let's see. He might have 30 home runs at the end of the year. So I think those two guys are going to make an impact this year. Pretty big impact.
I think Cody Bellinger is going to struggle. And that's just because, anything shoulder related is legit. Like, it's hard to come back from that. And to be honest, I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it'll give him time to just heal, right? The other thing that I think we're going to have the best bullpen in baseball, straight up. This bullpen is no joke. if you add the likes of a Tony Gonsolin that's working on stuff, Dustin May in there, that's a dirty bullpen. And then you have Corey Knebel already in there. The existing bullpen already was good, right? And obviously you have your subtractions. Excuse me. You have your subtractions of Petey Pablo, as everyone called him, and I think, as a part of that hot take, I think that the Dodgers get crazy and they acquire Josh Hader, whether it's now, whether it's at the trade deadline. Everyone knows that that's the guy, and if there's a team that can make that deal happen, it's the Dodgers.
All right, I want to change my hot take. My hot take is going to be Kenley Jansen will not be the Dodgers closer by the middle of next season.
Well, and I was going to add that to the take. I think Kenley gets traded. I think they're going to move on from him just because of the deal. Not a hard feelings thing. It's a money thing. And, it's a lot of money for a dude that probably is not going to be the closer. And I agree with you. I don't think he'll be the closer. I think if there's any time to kind of groom Brusdar Graterol to be the closer, it'd be now, to kind of get him going. But, we've seen crazier things. I mean, we just, and look what happened last year with all the spot starts that they had to make. And I think the dude that's going to just stand up, that's just going to have just a preposterous year going into everything as far as the bullpen goes is Victor Gonzalez. Victor Gonzalez showed that he's legit. He showed that he's the truth. And I think that's the guy that it might potentially take that, Kenley role, if you will. But he also could be a setup guy. He can be a lot of that. But it's going to be regardless with all that bullpen's going to be lights out. There's just no other way to put it. I mean, their whip is already insane, before this year. Now you add the Corey Knebels of the world. Blake Trinan obviously was lights out. That bullpen's just going to be legit. So, I mean, it's going to be an interesting season because now the storyline going into before today was, how are the Dodgers going to counter the Padres? And the Padres got bodied today. And so, and so did the rest of baseball for the most part, because of all the, and I do think that, I'm one of them. I didn't think the Dodgers were going to make that move today. I'm surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised because, he may not be a Garrett Cole, but he's good. He's consistent. And why wouldn't you want that in your rotation? I mean, why not? If you can afford it, why not? So it's going to be a fun season. And I'm stoked to do this podcast with you guys every week. And we have some fun stuff coming up, and the content's going to be cool. Roger's going to be super sad when he can't go to a game in person in Arizona, but that's fine. But I mean, we're gonna weather the storm together in another odd pandemic year. But on that note, we're going to end this from your boys, Alonso Juan and the voice in the sky, Roger. Thank you for joining us on the inaugural Bleed Los podcast. We'll be doing these every week. And it'll probably sound better moving forward because this is not going to be an emergency podcast every week. And so it'll be tight. But in the interim, please give myself a follow at the Bean818. Give Juan a follow. I apologize, Juan. I always forget your handle. What's your handle?
Blue Revolt Film.
And then at Dodgers Beat is our main handle. Over under, how many podcasts do you think until I actually remember your Twitter handle?
I'm going to go with 162.
That you're probably right.
I think we're going to go the whole season with you not.
It'll be like the Jimmy Kimmel thing where it's like, and I'm sorry we ran out of time, Matt Damon.
Exactly.
It'll just be that bit all the time. But Thank you guys for joining us. Until next week, have a safe and stay healthy time, and we'll talk to you soon.